Hey folks, today we're going to take a look at a game that is currently seeking funding on Kickstarter. That game is called Dice Upon a Time, and it's from Corona Games. Now, if you like what you see throughout the rest of this preview video, I'm going to encourage you to go to the official Kickstarter project page. You can do that by following the link in the top corner of your screen, as well as down in the description section underneath this video. Now, Dice Upon a Time is a competitive dice placement game, sort of worker placement, but with dice in this particular case. The theme of the game is that you are taking control of characters from Grimm fairy tales, the actual capital G Grimm's fairy tales, not just Grimm, and you're trying to complete adventures and quests within this fairy tale realm. So one character can be Snow White or Rapunzel, Little Red Riding Hood, the little tailor or whatever his name is, and so on and so forth. You all have your own special abilities, but what you're really trying to do are complete these quests by going to different locations on the board and activating those special effects. But in order to do that, you need to place your dice to do transportation across the map, as well as using special effects on some of the dice as well, and using magic items, and so on and so forth. But before we get too ahead of ourselves with just this explanation, let me give you a detailed explanation of the game with a prototype copy of the game. So do bear in mind that what you see here in this version that I have is not going to be what the final version will be. It's going to be much higher quality in the final version, miniatures, and a much more higher quality board, things like that. But again, that's why you need to go to the Kickstarter page to find out more information about what that final version will look like. But then in any event, once we're done with this preview section, we're going to come back and discuss it further. Dice Upon a Time is a competitive dice placement game for 2 to 4 players. Each player takes control of a character from Grimm Brothers fairy tales. You'll gather resources and magical gear, and then take on dangerous quests in order to gain adventure points, or AP. Whoever has the most AP at the end of the 6th chapter of the game will be the winner. Set up the game by first laying out the game board. Along the bottom of the board, line up the 6 chapter cards in their appropriate spots, which will then be removed as you begin each round. Place the special snake die on the snake's spirit animal box on the board, and do the same for the rabbit with its rabbit tokens. More on these in a moment. Make a stock of the other tokens as well. The 3 resource tokens, which are apples, coins, and bread, and 4 unique quest tokens. Along another side of the board, shuffle and place the various card decks. Quest cards that are split into levels 2, 3, and 4, magic item cards, and story cards. More on all these in a moment. Each player will choose or be randomly dealt a character. You have the option of playing with or without the character's special abilities, which can be activated once per chapter by flipping the card over, and which will let you do things like manipulate dice, gain movement, etc. When you have your character, choose the accompanying figure and place it in the town in the center of the map. Also, take a set of 5 dice in a color of your choosing and choose one player at random to gain the start player marker. Whoever that player is will draw 2 quest cards in any combination from the 3 quest decks and 1 magic item from that deck. Then every other player in clockwise order will do the same. Magic items are kept hidden until used, but quest cards are kept face up next to the character card for everyone to see. You are limited to 5 active quests at a time. With that, you can begin the game, starting with removing the first chapter card. Every player will then roll their pool of dice and leave them next to their character card as they are. The player with the start player marker will go first, followed by every other player in clockwise order. On a player's turn, the first thing they must do is place a die on the board. This can be on any of the routes on the board or on one of the 4 spirit animal fields in the corners of the board. There are special rules for placing dice. A die placed into a socket must have a value of at least as high or higher as the number originally in the socket. Then other players may also place theirs on top of yours if their value is as high or higher than the previous stacked number. And you can even stack your own dice on your dice that were previously placed, but the maximum number of dice that can be stacked on any location is 3, and there are some locations that have other requirements as well. The special faces on the dice always count as 6 for the purposes of placement, and then you get to activate a special effect. The potion face lets you draw a magic item. The X face bans other players from stacking on top of that die unless they use a ban face as well, but you can override your own ban die with any other face as long as its value is 6. The double face will double any resource tokens you may receive if you move into a location that gives resource tokens after placing that die. And finally, the book face forces you to immediately draw a story card. Before we go any further, let's talk about those cards that I've been mentioning. Magic items are kept secret until used, which can be on your turn or another player's turn, so long as the text of the card applies in the situation. When used, they're discarded, but the whole deck can be reshuffled and used again if you run out of magic items. The small story cards are divided into good luck cards, bad luck cards, lucky side quests, and unlucky side quests. Good and bad luck cards will either help or hinder you, respectively. Bad luck cards in particular will usually give you a choice about which negative effect to apply to yourself or which reward to give to another player. Lucky and unlucky side quests will specifically add or subtract from your adventure points at the end of the game. Lucky side quests require certain conditions to fulfill to get those bonus points, and conversely, unlucky side quests may be discarded if you meet certain conditions in order to avoid taking the point penalty. The most important cards in the game are the quest cards. At the end of the game, successfully completed quests are worth their level in points, but higher levels are harder to complete. Some quests simply have you discard specific resource tokens or tokens of your choice, while others have you give tokens to a specific location or character on the board, or sometimes a monster. More on that in a moment. Back to the gameplay. After placing a die and potentially activating an effect, you may then move your figure to an adjacent field by going down the route that you just placed on. When you move onto this new field, the ability of that location activates. Every location has different effects. The town space you start in, if you go back there later, lets you draw a quest card. The King's Field lets you draw 3 quest cards, keep 1, and return the rest to the bottom of the decks. The Fairy Field lets you take 1 resource token of your choice. And speaking of that, there are specific resource fields for each of the individual tokens that lets you take just that type of token. Magic Item Field, you guessed it, lets you draw a magic item, and the Steed Fields act as a sort of teleporter. When you arrive on one Steed Field, you may immediately jump to another Steed Field elsewhere on the board. The rest of the locations are buildings or supporting characters or monsters, which don't do anything on their own in particular, but they are required to be visited for certain quests. But character locations in particular will also force you to draw story cards, whether you want to or not, because remember, some of them are bad. And you can't actually complete quests just yet, so if the story card affects your ability to complete a quest, you might just be out of luck. Alternatively to activating locations, you can instead place your dice on the spirit animal fields in the corners of the board. The rabbit can have 3 dice stacked on it, and the player who is either alone at the end of the chapter or on top of the stack at the end will become the start player for the next chapter and also take a rabbit token, which can be used in place of a dice to move through a socket and into an adjacent field. The snake field works kind of the same way, in that up to 3 dice can be stacked there, and only the top die wins. But in this case, the winner gets the snake die, which can be rolled with your regular dice in the next chapter. The snake die either gives you a value of 4 or 5, a specific resource token, or the snake face, which is a failure. It means the die is just immediately returned to the board with no other effect. The wolf field can only hold 1 die and is immediately activated when placed on. It forces every player in order to sacrifice one of their unused dice to the field without activating its special effect, if any. Finally, the fox holds 1 die in each of its 2 sockets. At the end of the chapter, the player or players can take back their die and place them on a face of their choice for the next chapter, while all the other dice you have are rolled at the beginning of the chapter as normal. The last part of the player's turn is completing quests, if the requirements are met. Completed quests are flipped over and left to the side until the end of the game. When your turn is over, the next player takes their turn, and so on until all players have either used all their dice for the chapter or have chosen to pass their remaining turns. All dice are then returned to their owners, and the spirit animal fields are checked to see if they will affect the next chapter. If a character ability was used, flip the card back over to recharge it. Start the next chapter by removing the chapter card and do it all over again. At the end of the last chapter, add up the points from all your completed quests with adjustments from side quests. Whoever has the most points is the winner of the game. That is Dice Upon a Time. I think the most notable thing about Dice Upon a Time is that it's taking what has been known for quite a while now as a very strategic and complicated Eurogame style mechanism, which is worker placement in a sense. In this case, of course, it's dice, but the premise is the same. It's taking that mechanic or mechanism and using it in not just a theme that is much more family friendly than just like the typical building a medieval town or something like that, or managing a farm, although those can be family friendly too, but this one is just this bright and colorful fairy tale realm. But it isn't just the theme, it's also the gameplay as well. Make no mistake, this is a strategy game. It is very important, every choice that you make. You have a lot of player agency in this game, even though at times you're at the mercy of the dice and what comes out of the deck. But nevertheless, you have a lot of different choices to make that can affect that luck and give yourself some better luck. And therefore, it's definitely a strategy game where you can have a plan, stick to the plan, make alterations to the plan when necessary, and so on and so forth. But it is not so overwhelming that it's going to overwhelm casual players or people who maybe have dabbled in this type of strategic game before, but still maybe it wasn't quite their thing. Maybe they needed that extra theming to get them into it, something a little more tangible than just managing a farm. but to have straightforward rules where it's like, oh, this makes sense. It makes sense that I'm putting this die here in order to travel to get this special ability, and I have to go visit the woodsman and give him some resources, and therefore he helps me with my quest. Then we have to go to the monster space, so I have to fight the monster, because it's all part of the story. And the theme all lends itself to that. You're going through chapters, not just rounds. You're completing quests, you're having side quests, you're getting magical items to use. And they all have a very technical, detailed effect on the game, but it's all in service of the theme as well, and that's going to help casual gamers get into the game, whereas they might not if it had a more dry theme to it. And there's just, like I said before, and I want to hit this part home, there's just so many different choices in the game. So you have your character special ability, which can be very powerful. It's only once per round, though, so you have to make very careful use of it. You have the different quests, and you have the choice of which quests to go for. You don't know which quest is going to come out of a particular deck, but maybe you want to risk going for a level 4 quest because that's a lot of points, but it's really hard to do. You're not penalized for having quests you don't complete at the end of the game, but you don't get anything for them either, whereas you might have been able to complete a level 2 quest instead. Less points, but at least it's some points. You know what I mean? So there's that, and because of the nature of the quest, you're encouraged to sightsee as much as possible, go around the board, and each of the different locations has those unique effects, and using them to your advantage, not just for the act of completing the quest, but putting yourself in a better position to do that. You can go to the King or the Fairy, but those are hard to get to and they're kind of dead ends. What if you instead take advantage of those steed fields to quickly scout around the map, getting as many resource tokens as possible, if those are the quests that you happen to have that particularly just need as many resources as possible, like the discard quest. So that's one area you can go down, and you have to kind of see how the cards lay out for you in that regard. The fact that you have those dice, which can just have numerical values, but can also have those powerful special effects and also count as the highest die value, 6. That can be amazing when used properly, especially since you can, one aspect of the game that is kind of mean, intentionally so, is blocking someone off from going down a route by putting an intentionally higher die than you even need to place, just to make it so much harder for them to put a higher value die on top of it. So strategy upon strategy, but it all makes sense and is very straightforward as well. Then you've got the spirit animal fields, which is always like, in some rounds you may want to do something more tangible along the routes of the board, but if you kind of don't have something to do in that particular turn or round, go for the spirit animal spaces, and they're not wasted. They can be incredibly powerful. Whether it's the fox, setting yourself up with a particular die you know you're going to need for the next chapter, going for the rabbit and trying to make it so that you can not only get a token, which is extremely helpful, but also trying to go for that start player marker as well, which gives you an edge in the beginning. You get to set the pace, at least for that first turn of the game, of the chapter. And just so on, and the extremely mean wolf field, which can just really ruin some other players' turns if used properly, but if you do it too early, it can ruin your turn too. So there's just so many things to do in the game, but because of the theme, and because none of it is overly complicated and all of it makes sense, a newer or casual player isn't going to be overwhelmed, while a player who is very experienced with this type of gameplay will still find a lot of strategy there and a lot of things to sink their teeth into. They're not going to feel like it's a baby game, like they don't know, okay, let's just go through the motions. They have to actively be engaged to make choices. So, if any of that appeals to you, the theme, the gameplay, the accessibility, the strategy of the game, or if it appeals to someone you know in your life, don't take my word for any of this. Go to the official Kickstarter page and find out more information for yourself, more information than I could possibly tell you here. You can do that by following the link in the top corner of your screen, as well as down in the description section underneath this video. That is Dice Upon a Time from Corona Games. Thank you so much for watching, and as always for supporting our sponsors. Take care.